Have you ever heard the phrase, if you want something right, do it yourself? Okay, now you can forget about that completely. Because my goal with this project was not to make something that's objectively good, but rather more funny than it is actually functional. Basically, I was getting into some Optimum Tech videos at the time, more specifically his Zero Mouse videos. I may not have the knowledge, time, or resources to create something of my own to that scale, but you know what I do have? Is cardboard and the indomitable human spirit. So how exactly am I going to build this monstrosity? Basically all I need other than cardboard is a PCB to shove in there and we'll call it good. Luckily for me, I have just the mouse to tear apart. This is the Hirali F300, a mouse I found back in middle school from a TechSource video and bought for 16 bucks. It's honestly not a bad mouse for the price. I've put some decent mileage on it myself. That being said, I can't exactly recommend it. The market's changed a lot since then. You have better budget options at this point. Also, quick side note, the company that made this mouse has seemingly pivoted to irrigation and other gardening related products. I guess the gaming mice didn't work out for them. But getting back on topic, how do I plan on making the shell of this cardboard mouse? Well, I had a Pulsar X2 on my desk at the time, so I decided to trace that. Not that this exactly ended up looking like a Pulsar X2, but that's besides the point. For the sides, I kind of just hot glued a rectangle of cardboard to the base. I basically ended up eyeballing the sides for the shape of them. I loosely traced the X2, but yeah, I guess you could say I made some revisions. During this whole process, I realized I didn't exactly have a great way to create smooth curves in 3 dimensions at once, if that makes sense. Basically, this mouse will be made up of very basic shapes, as opposed to an actual mouse that usually has no flat sides excluding the bottom. Things like comfort grooves or comfort in general are pretty much out of the question. After cutting out the sides, I decided to see if the PCB would actually fit. Thankfully it did, but only barely. One of the front corners was kind of digging into the wall of the mouse, but that's fine. It's clearly just a roundabout way of securing the PCB better, since I kind of just taped that shit down otherwise. All I had to do before the first test was route the cable out the front of the mouse and plug it in. I think it's really funny that this mouse made of literal cardboard has RGB. Hey, it works. Something I hadn't considered before was how mouse switches get clicked when you press down on the mouse button. I know that sounds obvious, but what I'm trying to say is there's an extended piece of the shell on the underside of the mouse button that actually makes contact with the switch. Makes total sense, but now I have to do that with cardboard. Which actually wasn't too much of a problem. I ended up gluing a small piece of cardboard to the underside of the mouse buttons and that worked out fine. That's pretty much everything that went into the creation of this thing. Surprisingly easy. Who knows, maybe I'll iterate on this design and try to make a cardboard mouse that's more competitive later on. If I were to do this again, here's what I would change. For starters, I would make it considerably smaller. My hands might be smaller than average, but I think for most this is a little too much. Smaller mice generally offer better precise maneuverability alongside being lighter, although since this is cardboard, that second part isn't as much of a concern. Speaking of which, this mouse ended up at a rather impressive 38 grams, which is impressive for an actual gaming mouse, but those are actual mice and therefore have normal mouse materials and designs, so I don't know if that really applies, but anyway. I think I'd also try to find a better alternative for what kind of cardboard I used as well, especially for everything other than the top. What I ended up using was just whatever I had lying around from Amazon packaging and whatnot, but it's very thick for what I was doing with it, which made it more difficult to shape and was also heavier than what an alternative cardboard might offer at the same rigidity. The material used for the top and therefore the buttons worked alright, but it would definitely be worthwhile adding some structural support in the middle of the mouse buttons underneath so you don't end up with the bending issue I ran into. This was exacerbated by the mouse being so large that it was difficult to press the buttons in a place where they didn't bend. If I had access to a nice wireless PCB that I didn't care about ripping out of another mouse, I would use that instead as well. The wire isn't a huge issue, really not much more of an issue than it is on a normal mouse, but I think it would help it feel less clunky since it did certainly have that feeling to it. There are other issues as well, like the cardboard dragging past the skates on the pad, or bad tracking due to liftoff distance, hard edges, and generally a bad shape. But hey, I could just fix these in version 2. So how does it actually perform in-game? Here's the crazy thing, better than I expected. I don't have the best aim regardless of peripherals, but I like to think it's decent. Over the course of just a few games, I was surprised by how borderline normal I felt I was playing. That being said, my performance did fluctuate. There were certainly some shots I just wouldn't be missing on another mouse.
Enemies at Charlie, go! Enemy at the
Something else to mention, if it wasn't obvious, I didn't exactly foolproof this design, so sometimes mouse buttons just wouldn't.
inbound.
Or it would stop tracking accurately mid-gunfight, but those instances were pretty rare and only mattered a handful of times while I was using the mouse. But that's just how it felt. How does it stand up to some real numbers? Hopping on KovaaK and comparing scores with the cardboard mouse to previous scores using other real mice show the actual disparity in performance. A difference I oddly enough wasn't as aware of as I should have been. Maybe I just thought I was doing better in game than I was because my expectations were so low. Who knows? I didn't really bother testing that for long, however, because I figured it wasn't really worth comparing a cardboard mouse made in like 2 hours to something like the OP one. Like, yeah, no shit, it's worse. Now, just for fun, the rest of this video is going to be every at least half decent clip I was able to get using this mouse in various different games. I hope you'll enjoy the video, and are feeling inspired to go make your own shitty peripherals out of non-standard materials. It's surprisingly entertaining.
UAV ready. Enemies. Enemy big hole in the eye. Not active. Back on Alpha. Step back. Objective. Keep hitting them.
Enemy at the cargo container.
You're needed at sea. Securing charge. Target down.
Unfortunately, I've decided this thing is simply too ass for me to continue trying to get clips with it, so that's the end of the video.